Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for the University of Regina's 2023 Alumni Effect Virtual Speaker Series. My name is Doug Fernick. I am the Dean of the Faculty of Science, and I'm a professor of mathematics at the University of Regina. Over the next half hour to 45 minutes, you'll hear from University of Regina alumnus, Dr. Eric Grimson, who is currently Chancellor for Academic Advancement at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Professor of Computer Science, and the Bernard M. Gordon Professor of Medical Engineering. Dr. Grimson received a Bachelor of Science with honors from the University of Regina in the subjects of mathematics and physics in the 1970s, and in 2021, he was awarded an honorary doctorate from the University of Regina. Before I introduce Dr. Grimson, I'd like to acknowledge that the University of Regina is situated on the territories of the Nehiyawak, the Anishinaabeg, Dakota, Nakota, and Lakota peoples, and is the homeland of the Métis Nation. The university operates its main campus on Treaty 4 territory with a presence in Treaty 6 lands. The University of Regina's Alumni Engagement Department is pleased to be able to offer this series virtually, and I hope your time with us today inspires you to attend future sessions. I'd like to point out that these sessions are being recorded and they'll be posted on the University of Regina alumni website so that you can watch the presentations again or share them with your friends and family. And you'll see the link in the alumni website in the chat if you'd like to access the video later. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce our November speaker in the University of Regina's Alumni Effect Virtual Speaker Series, and that's Dr. Eric Grimson. And Eric, we're very glad you're joining us. As Chancellor for Academic Advancement at MIT, he represents the institution to alumni, parents, and others, and is a central advisor to MIT's president on issues related to MIT's campaign for a better world. As Vice President, he oversees MIT's efforts in online education, including OpenCourseWare, MIT X, and X Pro. As a faculty member since 1984, he has previously served as head of the Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science and as Chancellor for MIT. In addition to research in computer vision and medical image analysis, Professor Grimson teaches introductory computer programming courses, including an online MIT X course. In all, he has taught nearly 2,000 MIT undergraduates and has served as the thesis supervisor to almost 50 MIT PhD students. Today, Dr. Grimson will discuss his career path from Estevan, Saskatchewan, all the way to Boston, where MIT is located. And he will share his research journey in medical imaging analysis with us as well. Following the presentation, we'll have about 15 minutes for a question and answer session. And I'll invite you to submit questions in two ways. One, you can submit them in the chat and I will pose them to Professor Grimson. Or if you would like to ask the question yourself, please raise your virtual hand. And let's see if I can give a demonstration. So that virtual hand, and then I'll ask you to pose your question yourself. If you're comfortable, you can open up your camera for doing that, but if you prefer not to do that, that's also fine. So the chat or virtual hand. Now I'll turn it over to Dr. Eric Grimson. We look forward, Eric, to hearing about your journey.
Thank you, Doug. I really appreciate that. And let me make sure that, oh, there we go. So thank you for the introduction. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. What I'd like to do is spend about 15, 20 minutes doing what I described here. How did somebody who grew up in a small town, I know it's technically a city, but a small town in Saskatchewan, end up at MIT? And what did I learn along the way about innovation that I hope gives you a sense of things that one can do in order to try and make a difference in the world? So I'm going to start with that journey and surviving imposter syndrome. So how did I end up at MIT? As I said, born and raised in Estevan. Moved to Regina at the end of 10th grade, so I completed my high school at Campbell in Regina. And then chose to come to Regina U of R to do my bachelor's degree. I double majored in math and physics, and I think I might have been the first person to do it because I know every semester I had to go get permission from the dean, well before Doug, to allow me to do this, but I managed to do that. One of the things that was nice about U of R was, as a small place, you had a chance to connect with people. And through the then head of the physics department, I spent 2 summers doing an internship, essentially in AI in Italy, which gave me a little bit of a bigger perspective, if you like. When I graduated, I knew I wanted to go to graduate school, and I foolishly only applied to 3 places. I was fortunate to get into all 3. And I had a choice of doing math at Waterloo, physics at UBC, or AI and math at MIT. And I made a choice based on, frankly, a great piece of advice from a mentor, a former math professor, now retired, who essentially said, you got to be willing to stretch yourself. If you don't try something harder, you just take the safe path. You're never going to know whether you've gotten where you wanted to go. And basically he said, take the stretch and have a plan B. Come back to Canada if it doesn't work out. And I chose to go to MIT. Now, when I got there, there was a number of interesting things I learned. The first one was I had a wonderful year of serious imposter syndrome, meaning I kept expecting somebody to come and tap me on the shoulder and say, look, we're really sorry. We meant to put your application in this pile, and we accidentally put it in the accept pile. What in the world am I doing at this place? I had to get used to a place like Boston. And to give you a sense of that, if you go to the tallest building in Boston, the Hancock Tower, there's an observatory, and you can literally see more people from the top of that tower than there are in the entire province. A little striking for somebody like me. I had to learn how to deal with Boston drivers. And if you've ever driven in Boston, you'll get that sense. One of the things you'll discover is they never make eye contact because that cedes their right to the road. So they just barrel ahead, looking neither left nor right and just hoping you get out of the way. And I had to deal with weird accents. People who would park your car in Harvard Yard or talk about being wicked smart. And I also discovered, apparently, we have accents. Because if I use this phrase somewhere in a sentence, out and about, people would say, oh, you must be from Canada. I can't hear it, but apparently they think we have an accent as well. But really it was, how in the world did a kid from Estevan, how are they going to survive at MIT? How are you going to deal with being in this place? And just in case you don't know MIT, I'm sure you're probably familiar with it. Arguably, depending which ranking system you use, but it's arguably the #1 engineering school in the world. It has been every year since 1983. That's 40 years. And depending on the ranking, it's one of the top 4 in the world. It also has had more Nobel Prizes since 1945 than any other university. And this year we won our 98th. So it's a high-powered collection of STEM talent. And that led to this really interesting question of what in the world am I doing there? One of the things I discovered when I got to MIT, and I hope is a lesson you'll see other places, is that in fact, MIT is a meritocracy. As a high school student, I actually thought about applying to MIT. I took a look at the price tag and said, no, I'm going to U of R instead. But in fact, at MIT, we do pure need-blind admission, need-based aid. So if you're admitted to MIT, we'll charge you a tuition based on what we think you can afford, which could be 0. More importantly, I discovered once I got here that graduate students, they certainly come from places like Harvard or Stanford or Princeton or Yale, but they also come from University of Regina or North Dakota State or Chinese University of Hong Kong. And what I really learned was at MIT, and I hope other places, if you have an idea, you can explain it, you can defend it, and you can adapt it to meet constructive criticism. You'll find that others will actually support you in exploring that idea. And so it's really the quality of your ideas that matter, not your pedigree or where you're from. Once I got to MIT, as you heard, I've had a fun time. I've been here now almost 50 years, joined the faculty in '84. I spent 20 years with a joint appointment at Harvard Medical School. And you can see a range of other things I've done at MIT, but I've been a member of MIT senior administration now since 2011, both as Chancellor for Academic Advancement and Vice President for Open Learning. And one of the perks of it is I get to meet interesting people like Matt Damon along the way, which is kind of a fun side benefit of being here. So that's how I got to MIT. I want to tell you a little bit about what I learned at MIT. And it goes back to that great advice I got from that math professor about being willing to take a risk. And I want to talk about especially taking risks about being innovative. And to give you a sense of that, let me give you just a little bit of a glimpse of how MIT thinks about encouraging innovation. We did a study 6 years ago where we asked how many companies are there anywhere in the world with the property of one of the founders is an MIT graduate and they're still active in the company. And you can see pictures here of 4 of them. The Roomba from iRobot, Atlas from Boston Dynamics, Mobileye, the Israeli company that does computer vision systems for driving, and Moderna, the pharmaceutical company. And what we discovered is there are 30,000 such companies. We only had 130,000 living alumni at the time. Generated 4.5 million jobs. And if you put their gross annual revenues together, it would be 1.9 trillion US dollars, which is equivalent to the 9th largest economy in the world by GDP. So MIT has this flavor of encouraging innovation. And the way they do it is by basically encouraging people to take risks. We have spaces we call sandboxes. Think of them as augmented maker spaces where students can go in and just create ideas, create prototypes, get input from other students, but build things and have them fail and build new versions of things. We have convening spaces open 24/7 because students claim their best ideas happen at 3 o'clock in the morning, where they can go in and build networks with others and brainstorm ideas. And we provide free mentoring services, advice to students from retired executives on how to create a business plan or how to protect your intellectual property or how to fire your best friend as you deal with an HR issue. And all of this is intended to support that risk-taking, which is really something that I think I learned and I really value from my time at MIT. So I want to show you an example of something my students and I created that was taking a risk, but had, I hope, an interesting impact on the world. And that was a project that we did together with collaborators at Harvard Medical School over a 20-year period. And it was a project in image-guided surgery. And here's the idea. I hope this never happens to you, but imagine you have a brain tumor. You want the surgeon to get it out. The surgeon will take an MR scan. You can see this hopefully augmenting on the left. And then in a second here, you're going to see a tumor. It's going to show up right there. That big thing is a tumor that needs to come out. Problem for the surgeon is they can see that on a monitor, but they have to somehow translate what they see to where do they go digging in a patient's brain. And we said, wouldn't it be nice if we could turn a surgeon into Superman or Superwoman, give them X-ray vision, let them be able to take a model of the patient from that scan and see through skin and bone in order to see where the structures are that they want to get to. More importantly, during surgery, we'd let the surgeon operate through a very narrow opening, but we would be able to show him or her exactly where the tip of their instrument is, both relative to structures inside and relative to elements of that scan. And that green outline is the tumor that they're trying to take out. And this would allow a surgeon to get to the tumor while doing minimal damage to anything nearby. We did this in neurosurgery. These are all examples of reconstructions of patients where we've taken an MR scan, we've used an AI algorithm to identify what kind of tissue is everywhere in that volume, and then created a visualization for the surgeon. In each case, the green structure is the tumor, sometimes very large. And we did it in other places. We did it for tumors in the throat, tumors in the lung, tumors in the spine. And what we wanted to do then was say, if we can build that model, how do we make a surgeon Superman or Superwoman? Although if you've met a surgeon, I will say most of them basically thought they didn't need any help achieving that status, but we were going to do it anyway. So the idea was to say, given a model of a patient, we're going to figure out how to exactly line it up with the position of the patient in the operating room so that a surgeon can look at a monitor and see through skin and bone to see where the structures are and track the instruments. And to do that, we do a little trick. That's a piece of taking a risk. We take a laser beam, we run it through a cylindrical lens, that turns it into a plane of light, and we bounce it off a mirror. So we change the mirror, it sweeps the beam across a table, if you like. We put a camera at an angle, and the reason for doing that is if there's something between the base table and the beam is deflected in the camera. And you can see it here. Each of those blue dots is a reflection of a different laser scan. We automatically get the points that lie on the skin surface of the patient. And then we take another AI algorithm, and it very accurately figures out how to rotate and translate those laser points so they exactly line up with the model. And that then allows us to, in great detail, align a model of the patient with the patient in the OR. And a surgeon looking at a monitor in front of them can then see the interior structures. They're looking through skin and bone to see where is the thing I want to get to, how do I get to it, and how do I avoid things nearby. We put some markers on surgical instruments. This is a great talk to give, by the way, right around lunchtime. Hopefully you're not squeamish. And that allows us then in real time to let a surgeon execute surgeries. As they insert an instrument, a pointer, a scalpel, a forceps into the surgical cavity, they see exactly where it is relative to the patient and on a monitor where the structures are nearby that they want to take out. And what do we do with this? We retired this system about 10 years ago, but we ran it on several thousand neurosurgical cases at one of the major Boston hospitals, Harvard hospitals here in Boston. We've used it in brachytherapy for treating prostate cancer. It's used routinely in sinus surgery. It's used for surgical planning in orthopedics and abdominal surgery. It's used for surgical training in countries in Africa. And it's used in a range of other surgical procedures. My friends, the surgeons tell me that they only use it on the most difficult cases, but they'll reduce surgical times from 8 hours to 2 hours because they can get to the targets quickly and remove them. And the nice thing for my students and I is there are thousands of people walking around today, hopefully because we were able to provide the surgeon with a better way of executing the surgery. So I want to give you an example of taking a risk. And I want to just finish with pulling this together to provide something I've learned about thinking about exploring innovation. And I would argue that anybody can be an innovator if they're willing to take that risk. As I said, be willing to stretch yourself. I greatly appreciate the advice from that math professor. Take the risk, have a plan B when it doesn't work. But if you don't stretch, you're not going to take on something that's really an interesting challenge. Second thing I learned was create a prototype. Got an idea, go build a prototype. Have your friends help you kick the tires. And in particular, create a bunch of them. The first one's probably not going to work. The fifth one may not work, but the 10th one will. And if you're willing to keep trying, figuring out how to adapt them, you'll get to the thing you're trying to accomplish. The third thing I learned was it's really crucial to build networks. Here at MIT, I'm surrounded by incredibly smart people, almost all of them smarter than me, I know. Fortunately, I'm tenured, so they can't take that away from me. But I rely on getting advice from people who either done this before or who have skills that complement what I want to do and are willing to share that advice, not to score points, but to say, have you thought about doing it this way? Or what about trying that style of it? Those networks are crucial. And the final thing I learned is I'm always open to trying to learn something new. And I would pass that advice on to anybody else. If you're missing a piece of information, of knowledge, of a skill, fill it in. One great way to do that, frankly, is to take online courses, which is the second part of my job at MIT. An online course can be a great way to fill in background. And that could be a small course, a mini certificate. It could be a full, what's called a MOOC, a massive open online course. It could be a MicroMasters, but it's a great way to keep learning and to add things that you'd like to know. And I want to finish with an example, actually a fun example for me. This is an example from about 5 years ago, where a farmer in Manitoba, I wish it was from Saskatchewan, but it happened to be in Manitoba, took an online course from MIT. Happened to be my course on Introduction to Computation, which has had about 2 million people register for the class, which is a frightening thought. Part of the reason he took the course was his brother was an MIT graduate and told him he should really take this course. So he did, took it online, did very well in the course, took a couple of other courses, and then built a remote control application using what he learned in that class, together with an open source platform, to build a system that lets him drive his tractor automatically. And when he's harvesting, he'll be in the combine and he will remotely have the tractor come up with a bin behind it and on the go simply unload into the tractor and send it back off to the silo or the granary. He uses it hundreds of times each season, says he saves thousands of dollars. And it's a great way at age 50 of learning a new skill and building something and taking that risk to try and be innovative about it. So that's my journey from Estevan to MIT. I still have that Canadian accent, I think. Out and about gives me away every time. I still hold 2 passports because I still feel like I've got a root in Saskatchewan. And I used to tell my graduate students, I moved south for the warm weather. I got to Boston. I thought I was all set. We'll see how that holds up. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing. And Doug, I'll be happy to answer at least nice questions. Although Canadian audience, they only ask nice questions. I'm not worried about it, but happy to answer questions from people.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was, it's always inspiring to hear another person's journey. And I particularly like the part where you talked about building many prototypes. And I know myself, I was running a science camp this summer, and it was in an Indigenous community, and one person was not familiar with some of the protocols when working with elders, and he said, "Oh, I apologize for my mistake." But the elder said, "No, it's not a mistake. It's an opportunity to learn."
Yeah.
And, you know, the idea of doing all of those prototypes, it's a learning opportunity each and every time. So yeah, nice. So I open the floor for questions. Nevin, good to have you here, Nevin.
Hi. Perfect presentation, Professor Grimson. So we parallel a little because the time you left Estevan, or pardon me, I guess U of R, I actually was drafted by the Bruins, went to Boston as an 18-year-old, played for 9 years. And so I had a plan B, though. My plan B was I was going to work at IPSCO in Regina. So I'm curious about what your plan B actually was.
So Nevin, thank you. I thought I recognized the name and delighted, and I will do a 30-second aside. Just a hockey aside. I have a second cousin whose name you might recognize, Stu the Grim Reaper. Grimson is my second cousin. And, I was encouraged to have a cutout of him to put in my office so that when somebody complained, I'd say, look, you can talk to me or you can talk to Stu the Grim Reaper. But anyway, great question. My plan B was to go to Waterloo. And do combinatorics. And I probably would have ended up being a mathematician somewhere. Nothing wrong with it. Doug's a good mathematician. But I knew it would be a safe path, but that was my plan B, was I would still stay in academia, but just drop back to, again, no disrespect to Waterloo, a great place, but it's not quite the MIT caliber of it. But that was my plan B. Doug, I was going to add to, if I can, to your comment as well. And I'm going to apologize for the story, but in my job, I have the pleasure of meeting lots of influential people. And I had a chance to host Mark Zuckerberg on campus a few years ago. And to the point you made, I asked Zuckerberg, so Facebook, first startup? And he laughed. He said, no, 7th. The other 6 you've never heard of. They didn't work. But it was that, what do you learn from it? How do you move forward? And if you keep repeating the same mistakes, it's a problem, but moving forward is number 7 worked out in his case, which is sort of the point.
Yeah, that's a good story, a good lesson. Are there other questions? I just looked at the chat. There's about questions about uploading the thing to YouTube, and it will be done. But maybe I'll ask, if I may, a question about imposter syndrome.
Yep.
Many people suffer from it, and it can be quite crippling. And just wondering, how was it that you managed to deal with it, and do you, overcome it? And you're very successful now, but do you still have tinges of imposter syndrome?
Yeah. I'm going to answer the second part first with a very quick story. I do still suffer, but I want to give this story. So there's a faculty member at MIT named Bob Langer. no reason you'd know about him, but Langer is the most cited engineer in history, meaning his publications have more citations than any other engineer in history. He has more patents than anybody but Thomas Edison. He started 36 companies, are all still running, one of which is Moderna, which has obviously done incredibly well. And I remember being in a discussion with Langer where somebody asked him that question. Do you ever sort of doubt what you're doing? Do you ever worry about, am I doing the right thing? And he said, oh God, all the time. That's how I keep moving forward, is because I always worry about, am I making the right choice here? And I think it goes back to that. If you're willing to put yourself out, you know, it will work. In my case, I think two things happened. One was at the end of my first year, I had a paper accepted at a conference. And it was a small conference, but it was still the first time I got to go and present something orally. And afterwards, when, I don't know, 15 people came up to ask questions, it made me realize, no, I can actually do something that's going to have some impact to people. I can do something that gets people's attention. I usually tell students, you know, who suffer from it, you know, everybody at MIT has something that makes them unique at this place. You just need to find it. You know, you're not going to be necessarily the top in everything. Nobody is, but you just need to find the thing that you are really good at. You know, hopefully it isn't sorting lint collections or something like that. It's actually something valuable. But I think that's the advice I always give to students. You know, we all suffer from it. And I think the best people constantly question what they're doing, because that's how they think about getting better at it.
Thank you for sharing that. There is a question in the chat that I'd like to pose, and is about mentorship, which you talked about a couple of times, and so the question is about the mentor that you mentioned, and were you actually emulating that individual as you went through your journey?
Yeah, great question. I did have mentors all the way through my career. As a junior faculty member, I can remember getting great advice on how to lecture from somebody who actually was a card-carrying member of the Actors Guild. And I'll give you the example that stuck with me, which I hope I've done during my talk. One of the things he said to me was, if you're not certain what you're about to say, pause, which I just did. Can be really annoying if you say or and or you know, or all those little things that really grate on a listener. Pausing can be a dramatic way of making a point. And that was a piece of mentorship that I got in terms of thinking about lecturing. As I moved forward in my research career, my supervisor, my PhD supervisor, was a great mentor. Unfortunately, he passed away 6 months after I completed my PhD. But I had other people here at MIT, including, you know, MIT presidents that were people that really inspired me to think about what to do, including convincing me not to be a university president, because that's such a painful job. I wouldn't want to touch it. Sorry, Doug, you're smiling with a 10-foot pole. But the answer is absolutely. And even today, at an age I won't admit to, but you can figure out, there are people that I still look to as mentors. Some of them older than me, some of them younger than me, but that really are people that I think of as, how can I learn from them about how to do something better? I like watching somebody give a great lecture, because I think about, how can I copy that? And I'll give you one last example of mentorship. Again, if you're in a teaching position, I've taught the course I teach, I've taught it 40 years, probably 60, 70 times. The night before every lecture, even though I've given the lecture 60, 70 times, I'll do a full dry run in my office. I'll walk through it because I want to be confident I know exactly what I want to say when. And that was something I got from a great piece of advice I got from a mentor. Worst thing you can do is suddenly be stuck thinking, what was it I wanted to say here? Practice makes it work.
That's amazing. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I might share just a similar experience. When I was younger and had to, like, just finishing my PhD or during my PhD, and I had to give public lectures, I used to like settle my nerves by being in the hotel room and give the lecture a few times in the hotel room to myself. So
Same idea.
Yeah.
Absolutely the same idea. It makes it just a little easier when you get up and figure out, I know how to do this. I agree.
And the person who posed that question about the mentorship just thanks you for the response as well in the chat.
I hope it helps. I hope it helps. It was a good question, a really good question.
Are there things so you mentioned some of the visualization that's related to surgical techniques. Are there things that you're passionate about now at this point in time?
Short answer is yes. Slightly longer answer is I'm been both amazed and amused to see where artificial intelligence is today. I started working in AI in 1975. In 1975, it was something you scraped off the bottom of your shoe. Or in Saskatchewan, we would refer to it as a cow pie, if you know the phrase. It was just not a respected area. And today you see AI everywhere. We need to be careful to make sure it's not misused, but I'm really intrigued to see how it's going to revolutionize education. It's going to revolutionize drug discovery. It's going to revolutionize transportation. It's really exciting to see what it can do to just make people's lives better, and hopefully do it in a way where, again, we have the guardrails to make sure it's not misused. But that's something that I find really intriguing to watch. And having seen it grow over 50 years, it's sort of fascinating to realize where it is today compared to where it was in 75. It's a really different place.
Yeah, that's a very interesting comment. Yeah, we could have a whole long conversation about AI, I think, and its benefits, and there's a lot of comments about its potential harms. But we do have another question in the chat, and again, it's related to the mentorship, and the person posing it is asking on behalf of her two sons, which are studying in science. Oh, there she is on the screen. And so how do you engage a person who will eventually be a mentor for you?
So I would give two pieces of advice to Patty. If I were a student today, the first piece of advice would be, is there a class that you really enjoyed? Is there a professor where you felt like, I've got a chemistry there. You won't know until you go talk to them, but you like the way they presented things. You like the style in which they did them. And then I would say, take the risk. Go talk to them after class. Say, I'm really thinking about a career in this space. Would you have some time to just talk to me about what it would like to be in that space, or give me some advice on things that I might do to try and improve it, or where should I look for an internship? It's taking the risk. I'd love to say all faculty members are very pleasant. I know that's not true, although at Regina, I'm sure they all are, but you take the risk, you talk to them, because that's how you will make the start. And Doug, my experience with most faculty is they're always happy to talk to a student, unless they're really jammed with something. But it's, if they don't have the time, they'll say, come see me during office hours, or I'm available tomorrow. But that's my advice, is start a conversation. Have some questions. Just going in saying, will you be my mentor, is probably not going to work. But going in saying, again, I'm really interested in this space. What's a good thing to do next? Is there some reading I can do? Do you have projects I could work on? Take the risk, but approach a faculty member. And the second piece of advice would be, see what the chemistry's like. Not everybody's going to be the right mentor for a particular individual, but somebody who's really got the right match, it'll work out really well. And that was my case with the mentor in math at Regina. Was just, we shared a lot of views the same, but he was willing to talk to somebody who at 18 didn't really have a clue, but he had that wonderful patience to make it happen. Take a risk. It'll work.
That's great advice.
Thanks, Eric.
So we're getting close to the end of our time, and but we do have time for one more question from someone other than me, if anyone would like to pose one.
I see an old high school friend on the screen, but he's not going to ask me a question. He's going to do it.
If I asked you a question, it would be too embarrassing, so I won't.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate your restraint. I really appreciate it. That's great, but nice to see you.
Yes, nothing like having it,
Having
in
your past
perpetuity.
dragged out.
Yeah. Well, thank you again, Eric, and thank you for everyone who joined us today and contributed to the conversation. As you know, a video of today's Alumni Effect will be posted soon on the alumni section of the University of Regina's website. And Alexis put a link into that chat earlier on if you want to copy it. And come again to the website to check for future lectures. And the next lecture will occur after the holiday season. So we'll fast forward to January 23, 2024, and we'll have the next luncheon lecture at that time. Until then, take care. Thank you for tuning in. It's great to have an audience and listen to such a inspiring lecture and hearing about Dr. Grimson's journey. So thanks, everyone, and thank you, Eric, especially.
My pleasure. Thank you as well. Thanks a lot.